All right, I'm going to go over the submission form for the 3D hologram, go through the rendering process for this. Pretty much everything I did last class about how to build the hologram is going to be consistent for the entire actual project. Okay, so there's not going to be anything new as far as like the modeling or any of that stuff. It's basically just using those basic shapes and then cloning them and then positioning them for your hologram. Okay. It's a very simple kind of exercise, just going through more cinema stuff. And because it's so simple, we're going to have basically a week and a half, 2-ish weeks on to finish this, starting last week. So 3D hologram, it'll be due September 23rd, which is a week from today. So we're only doing a still, so we don't have to worry about rendering out a whole sequence of things. I do recommend with any of our projects, as you find like, hey, I really like the way this is turning out, that you do go back and you do render out like an animation, or you do render out a higher res image sequence, okay? Even if you have a camera floating through it, for your portfolio, it's going to look 100 times better than just having a still image, okay? So typically a still is great because we can look at it and see like, yes, this is, the colors work, the textures work, the lighting works, the cameras work. Now I want to see it move. And then you drop that into your demo reel when you get to your portfolio class and you're good to go. All right, so we'll be building a 3D hologram using primitive shapes and cloners. Creating a hologram material with more transparency in the center, less on the outside. That was the first thing we did last time. Creating a base surface for the hologram. That's the ground. Building a complex looking hologram using a variety of tools and techniques. Working with lights, materials, and cameras to find the best way to present the hologram. And then organizing our folder structure, scenes, layers, and materials. This one will be on pretty much every one that we do. You'll be turning in your artwork, so any reference material that you've done, your illustrator drawing that you did of like, this is what I want things to look like, you'll turn that in as well. And then you'll turn in everything. So your project folder, your reference images, your end image. We should have at the end of this a high-res still image, 1920 by 1080. And again, this is kind of good for a video. If we wanted to print it, we would actually want this to be probably double that size to get a good quality size print. If you think of like an 11 by 17 image, if I were to open up my calculator and I went 17 inches times 300 pixels, that's 5,000 pixels to make a good 11 by 17 print if I was going to print this thing out. Okay. Make a 2510 and 6 points possible. Okay, pretty straightforward. This is, again, going to be a more simple assignment, just to, again, kind of reinforce stuff we know, adding some new stuff in there, and then rendering it out. Questions on that? I would recommend 2 while we're waiting for this to load. Close After Effects, I don't need that anymore. Cinema does have version 21 out now. The student version of 20 is currently still available. So if you do want it at home, you want to get it before they switch over to 21. Once they switch to 21, you can't go back down to 20. So that means if you work at home on version 21 and you come here, you can't reopen your files. Okay? So make sure you have version 20 at home. That's what we're using in class. Oops, that's loading. All right, so I'm going to go to my open hologram. All right, so here's my example hologram one that I did. We're pretending that you're at this point of having all these pieces kind of laid out. You see my ground right here is all those little dots. You could have lines, you could have grids, you could have something. Just make sure it has some sort of groundwork to kind of sit on. And then you have all your other pieces in here that are just positioned. And then I'm going to create a camera. I'm going to look through the camera, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this render cam. Okay. And then I'm going to deselect the camera and try to find a good angle. Something like this, we kind of lose the 3D sometimes. So you never really want to go when we're doing something like this unless we can see that 3D kind of moving around, excuse me, directly from above. So we want to hit it at some sort of angle here, okay? I'm also going to grab my camera and change the focal length on this. A smaller focal length will make it more like aspected. So we're getting more of like a fisheye. This is not totally fisheyed yet. If I went down to like 4, then we're getting more of like a fisheye lens. Oops. Okay, that's way too much. 88 was what I used on this one. It's a good number to use because it kind of squashes some of the details. So it brings everything into frame, and it doesn't really distort it too much. 35 I think is the default, or 36 is the default. But you can kind of play around and see, what you like best for yours. Okay, it's fine to cut some stuff off, so I'm cutting off, the sides of this. I'm looking at where these bars are here, where the bar is there. I think that might be like a cool angle right there. I'm looking at symmetry also. I don't want to have anything like this far over where I have a bunch of space here and nothing there. I want to make sure it's kind of centered. Okay, so that's good. I'm going to lock my camera, so I'm going to go to Tags, Cinema Tags, and put protection on this. So now my camera's locked. I can't accidentally move it around. Okay, so that's a good reinforcer to make sure I don't screw it up. I'm going to go to my render settings and just reset this back to the default. Okay, and default is set to standard. Nothing else is on there. So I'm going to change this to physical. That's what you want to render your stuff in. And I'll want to click the physical thing, and I want to click on depth of field. So that's what's going to give me, in this image, that blurriness that's in there. That makes it feel like it's actually a bit bigger, a little more technological than we had. So I'm going to go to physical, make sure depth of field is on. I'm going to turn my sampling quality to preview for now, just so I can test this. And I'm also going to go to my output settings and lower this even further to, let's say, 640 by 360. Okay? Anytime I do a test, I lower my resolution pretty substantially because I want to see fast iterations of this. Now I can hit, click the camera first. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to change my focus object. Oops, let me delete this. Come on, render cam. Open this up. Oh, there we go. Clear. This is what's in focus. So right now my settings are kind of coming over from my other one. I'm going to reset it to the default. There we go. So this is my default depth of field. So you see that there is some blurriness here, but there's nothing really clear. Okay. So on my camera, I'm going to go down to my object, go to focus object, and this is where I tell it this is what I want to be in focus. You can do two things. One, I can connect an object. I can say I want this object to be in focus, or what I can do is tell it a distance. Okay. If I click on this arrow for focus distance, and I click, then that distance will be in focus. Okay. Now I hit Shift R again. And then we should see this a little bit more in focus. I think my physical preview settings are maybe a little bit too low, so I'm going to set that to medium so I can see this better. Yep, that's much better. Yeah, it's taking a lot longer, so let's set it maybe to low and find a happy medium. There we go. So you can see about here is in focus. You can see it's pretty clear right there. And then it just drops off and we lose that sharpness of our objects. We can also just drag an item in. So if I go in here to my items and I find my center, right there, I drag this into my focus object. Now that's my object that's in focus. And so it's going to use that distance as what's in focus. Okay, now it doesn't look incredibly different, just subtly different, but it is there. The other thing I can do is go under physical and change this f-stop. So just like in a real camera, changing your aperture on something will change how much depth of field you have. A smaller aperture will definitely lead to, smaller aperture, number, yes, bigger thing, yeah, that's right. So a smaller aperture leads to a bigger opening, which then gives you more depth of field. So all you have to know is you lower this number. So 1 is where I'm going to go with this. I'm going to go actually to like 0.05. And that should give me a pretty decent range there. Didn't really change much. I'll make sure. Render cam, yes, as I'm looking through. Physical, yes. All right, I'm going to go really low. Sometimes in 3D, you really have to like push the values until it's like ridiculous just to make sure it's working. It's definitely working because everything is like out of focus. So now I can kind of dial this back some. So 0.05 might be good. I'm trying to find a good range where I can see like a good section is in focus and then the rest is not in focus. Think of something like macro photography where that bug is like clear crystal and then everything around it is just out of focus. So that's almost there. I think maybe 0.1 might actually be good. I also have to keep in mind that I'm at a lower resolution, so it might be a little bit fuzzier anyway. All right, so you can see these are in focus. I'm going to go, I guess, in this camera, in this case, like 1 might even been a good number. Or 5. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with 5 here. Okay, so you can see the difference in what we're bringing into focus there. Yep, it's too much because I don't want to have these things in focus way back there. So I'm going to go to 1. And again, this is why we're at a lower resolution, lower quality, because these things just go a lot quicker as opposed to, you know, having to wait, you know, hours to get anything rendered out. 0.25, let's see what that looks like. All right, I think that one's going to look really good now. Yep, that's good. Okay, this is pretty clear. Even though it's kind of fuzzy right now, it'll clear up when I take my settings up. But that's really blurry, and that's what I like. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Render settings again. Then I can set this to automatic. Or sorry, not automatic. Set this to high. Depth of field is good. Go to my output. Go to my settings, 1920 by 1080. We're only rendering 1 frame, so we can just do current frame. Okay, so we don't have to do anything special there. And then under save, we'll give this a name and location. Hologram images, Sarcona, hologram. I'm going to call this one boring because I'm going to adjust it afterwards. Okay. And then I will make sure this is a TIFF. That works. And then I would hit Shift-R. Oops, not there. Click in here first, then hit Shift-R. And then it's going to do the exact same thing I did before. It's going to render out the image, drop it into our images folder. Okay. I'm going to stop this because I already have the image saved as a boring one, so I'll just use my boring one. All right. Oops, I guess I don't have that one saved. All right. For speed's sake, I'm just going to lower this because this might take 15-20 minutes to render this out. Actually, I'll go half the size. Okay, you would go full size. I'm just going half size for speed so I can get an image to work with. But typically, anything we do in 3D, we never want to just leave it as raw. We never want to take like, this is my rendering and now give it to the world. We want to process it somehow. We want to add maybe glows to it, or we want to add vignettes to it, or we want to enhance some of the look of what we're doing with our scene. Even the depth of field that we're doing here, in this we're doing it right inside the software. Later classes we do where you render it out and you're able to add that as a post feature. So you can add the depth of field afterwards, okay? All right. I'm just going to use this one. This is still taking a lot longer than I was anticipating it to take. Okay. So I'm going to go from here and just tweak this one so that it looks a lot better. So one thing I can do is add a glow to this. In filter, in stylize, or one of these areas, there's a glow I think somewhere in here. I'm not going to use that one. Okay, I'm going to make my own. So I'm going to go and duplicate the background. And then I'm going to set this to be an add. And you'll see just by duplicating that layer and setting it to add, we get a glow on there. So that's a pretty quick way to get a nice glow. And then using some of our Photoshop tools, I can do things like add a layer mask to this. Make my brush really big. Make sure it's really soft. And I'm just going to paint in black just to kind of knock out some of the areas I might not want to glow so much. Okay, now I'm being very soft with this. I don't want to look very transitioned. It's kind of like a giveaway if I see something like this, right? You can see that dark line there. It's like, okay, you don't know what you're doing, right? Same thing here. Like I can see the pattern of those brush strokes, like basically like stamping on. So I want to do this nice and soft. So soft brush, oops, and make sure I'm clicked on something, and then there we go. Okay. So that looks already 10 times better than that, right? That looks a lot better. I'm also going to go into a new layer, and I'm going to give this a color. So I'm going to just eyedrop maybe this blue here. Actually there, I think. That might be a cool one. And I'm going to use the same technique. So I'm just going to go here. My flow is set down, so I am using a lower flow. And I'm just going to give this a little bit of a coloration around the edges, okay? Now, the bigger your file, Photoshop will actually go slower. So even though you do have, let's say, a nice smooth brush, your settings are good, as you draw, Photoshop might just jump. So just be aware of that, and sometimes you just have to go over things a couple times to make it nice and smooth. All right, so now this looks pretty junky, so we'll fix it in a second. I'm going to go to my mode, and I'm going to just play with the modes. You'll find the way that these modes interact, you can create a whole bunch of variations to make your stuff look a lot better. So let's say I go to soft light here. Do a little before and after. That definitely looks a lot better, right? You can see here that looks a little bit too white. And now we have this like bluish tint around those edges, okay? I could even duplicate this again, set this to be a multiply, and then take the opacity down. And then what that's going to do is just darken some of those edges too. So not only do we have this depth of field that's drawing our eye right to the center of this hologram, but now we have this darker color around the edges and a desaturation around the edges that are again drawing our eye right into this main spot right in the middle, okay? Now if we wanted to add any accents of our own, we could do that too. So let's say that I wanted to just highlight maybe this thing here. I'm going to go to my brush. I'm going to try to hit my brush hotkey, which doesn't want to work. All right, I'll just click it. Make sure I'm on this. None of my hotkeys are working right now. That's perfect. All right, let's just shrink this down by hand. A little bit too low. That's good. Okay. I'm going to, excuse me, eyedrop that color there. What? There we go. And I'm going to zoom in, and I'm on a different layer, so I'm not overwriting anything. There we go. Maybe a little bit here, a little bit there. And then again, I'm going to change this to like an add. And then I'm going to take the opacity of that layer down. Oops, too much. And then if I think like that's already too strong, I'll go and add a blur to this. And not that much of a blur. Just like, I think that's good. Just like that. Okay. Now again, all of these little things that you do are just enhancing that image to make it look better and better and better. Cool. So I like the way that looks, so I'm going to save this. And I will save it as Sarcona Hologram. Awesome. Not with an exclamation point, though. I'll save this as a PSD. And then that's what you're going to be turning in is that PSD, where I can see here's all the stuff I did to make this look not boring and make it look awesome. And I should be able to go through and see the horrible one. Look at how horrible that is. And now look at that one a lot better. Okay. Now, because this is a, I think this is a different size than I wanted to. Yeah, this is 1280. My 1921, I'd have to redo all that stuff again to it. But it took me 5 minutes to do. The more you do those things, the quicker you'll get it iterations and popping those things out. Some of the things you could actually repurpose. Like these two things I could probably repurpose if I wanted to. Even that. But these definitely need to be redone. Yes, save that. So then by the time you're done with this assignment, you should have here and here, hologram. You should have a scenes folder with your latest scene in here. I have several scenes. And you should have your awesome one. I have extra ones that I'm just going to leave in there. Inside your cinema file, you should have everything nicely organized. You can see very clearly, here's my render cam, here's this. I added a light because I needed some light to just kind of punch in there. We already gone over the light, so I don't need to talk about that. I have all my materials down here labeled. Not this one, I can get rid of that one, don't use it. And that's it. Now I did tweak my materials too, so from the base one that we went through, I did go through and tweak some things, so don't think that everything's going to be locked in right at the first one we did. As you start building stuff in your scene, you may realize like, hey, I want to go into that transparency. Oops. Sorry, not that one. Where am I at? Reflectance, transparency, that is it. This and this. There you go. And you may adjust that spacing between these just to create more contrast between what's transparent and what's opaque. Okay? I have a little bit more of a setup there. You don't need to get into the other stuff. Right? So I may have, right there, this is pretty sharp transparency. And then this is going to be pretty gradated. Okay? So I may squeeze these in a little bit closer to make that punch a little bit more. Cool. Questions on that?